Most of us know at least discouragement. Discouragement typically is related to a loss of something. You're discouraged because you lost your job. You're discouraged because you lost your health. You're discouraged because the bills have climbed up and you've lost your financial freedom. But when discouragement continues and elongates itself, discouragement devolves into depression. Depression is discouragement on steroids. It's discouragement that now has produced an ongoing level of gloom, an ongoing level of emotional pain. And when discouragement becomes depression, depression unresolved becomes despair. And when depression becomes despair, that ongoing discouragement that has led to depression, which now results in despair, produces a sense of hopelessness. You see no way out. You see that there's going to be no exit sign. There's no way to get around this thing. There's no way to beat this thing. It will not go away. And then when discouragement results in depression that leads into despair, then you wind up considering the possibility of death. Because maybe that's my only way out, because the hopelessness has gone on so long, so that death as a result of despair due to continuing depression resulting from ongoing discouragement has placed me in a place where I see nothing else to live for. All of us have been in level number 1, discouragement. Many of us have been in level number 2, depression. That's our situation today with Elijah. Now, last time we saw Elijah, he's rolling nice. Last time we saw Elijah, it closes chapter 18 by saying the hand of the Lord was on him. I mean, he's run 15 miles nonstop at lightning speed because the hand of the Lord was on him. He's been sucked down rain from heaven because the Lord was on him. He's destroyed 400 prophets because the hand of the Lord was on him. Here is a prophet on steroids. He's got it going on and he is doing large. But in less than 24 hours, his world changes, his life collapses, and in less than a day, everything is turned around and he has gone from the hilltop, the mountain peak of victory, to the valley of despair. When we come to chapter 19, we find out what led to this emergency shift in his emotions. Ahab had a controlling wife. He had a woman who was telling him what to do. He had a controlling wife, and this wife had taken over when it was Elijah's anticipation that Ahab was going to turn things around. He didn't know who he was married to. He was married to a lady named Jezebel, and Jezebel was running this show. Jezebel was calling this shot, and Jezebel was telling him, Elijah, you're a dead man. Some of y'all work for Jezebel. Some of y'all work with Jezebel. Some of y'all live with Jezebel. Jezebel is an evil threat that comes your way. It is something or someone who threatens your well-being, because she threatened by tomorrow this time you're going to be dead. So any threat in your life that comes your way that produces discouragement, depression, despair, or even, as we're going to see in a moment, a desire to die, is a Jezebel in your life. Is something or someone who threatens the stability of your mental well-being. So you see, we are made up of 3 parts. We're made up of body, our physical being. We're made up of soul. Psychology is soul, the study of the soul. So we're made up of a personhood, and then we're made up spiritually. What you have to understand is all 3 of these are interconnected and interrelated. So as you'll see in a moment, if you feel bad physically, it affects how you're going to think psychologically, which may affect also how you function spiritually. Or if you're down spiritually, that may affect your ability to function physically, or your ability to be able to reason psychologically. Or if you're off psychologically, it can make you want to go to bed physically and make you not want to deal with something spiritually. Because all 3 are interconnected and all 3 affect the other 2. So it is understanding how these three connect with each other, and all three are in this story, that you will understand how to deal with that which controls the mind. Now let's understand, since emotions are part of the soul, how the soul relates to the thought, so that you can understand how to find God's work in that which discourages you emotionally. Your emotions are like the caboose on a train. Your mind, your thoughts are like the engine. When the engine of a train goes up the mountain, the caboose is going to go up with it, because the caboose is hooked on to the engine. When the engine goes down into the valley, the caboose is going to go with it, because the caboose is going to follow wherever the engine winds up. So if the engine is your mind and the caboose is your emotions, if your mind is wrong, your emotions are going to be wrong. If your mind is right, your emotions are going to be right. That's why a change in your mind will always change how you feel. Elijah is not a carnal Christian. Elijah is not an unspiritual person. He's been called a man of God. We just saw the hand of the Lord was on him. So guess what? It's possible for spiritual people to get depressed. Depression is not a sign of lack of spirituality, because God is going to reference him throughout this conversation as his servant. Why would spiritual people get discouraged, depressed, into despair, and even get suicidal? Why would that happen to us spiritual people? Because we found out from last time in James 5 that we are of like nature. We're human. And in our flesh and blood, that is, in our humanness, we become subject to influences that trigger thoughts in our minds. So you can be spiritual and be down. You can be spiritual and be emotionally struggling through something. So don't automatically feel that your discouragement is due to your carnality. Now, if you are carnal and if you are spiritual, then it could very well be related to that. But it's not automatically related to that, specifically in the life of someone who is pursuing God. I want to address two things. Number one, I want to address when he got the supernatural. Watch this. When did the angel show up? The angel only showed up after Elijah had had an honest conversation with God. You see, he told God, I want to die. He told God, I'm not good as my fathers. He told God, I have nothing left. He told God, I'm done. And God sent an angel. The reason why a lot of us don't get our angels is because we're not honest with God. We play church, play religion, and certainly play prayer. So Elijah comes and he bears his soul to God. Because look, when you're ready to die, there ain't no time to be cute. That's not the time to just go through religious activity. He gets raw with God. Second thing I want you to notice is how God addressed him. The first need he addressed was his physical need. Because one of the causes of discouragement, depression, and despair is physical. You know how irritated you get when you're tired? You don't want people talking to you, you don't want the kids talking to you, you don't want your mate talking to you, you don't want nobody bothering you. He gives them a cake, he gives them water, and he gives them, tells them to rest. Why? Because some causes of discouragement are physical. And unless the physical is addressed, the psychological is going to be off, and the spiritual is going to be off. Because if you're physically off, you don't feel like praying. If you're physically off, you don't feel like relating properly. If you're physically off, we all know what it is. So it is quite legitimate to examine whether there are physical causes to your emotional struggles and to have those physical causes addressed. Now, God addressed it supernaturally because he sent an angel. But notice the angel doesn't come until the communication takes place between Elijah and his God. So God needs honest communication, prayer, but real prayer, not fake prayer, not play prayer, honest prayer. He then dismisses and dispenses the angel in order to provide the physical help that he is needing to deal with his reality of depression that he is going through. So, when you are depressed, Many times the last place you want to go is to the mountain of God. The mountain of God means to go in God's presence. That's the last place you want to go. But that's the first place God wants you to run to. He wants you to run to his presence and bring your depression with you. Bring your discouragement with you. He'll give you enough to get to the mountain, to get to his presence. So he calls him into his presence. Now it gets really interesting. Now there are a number of issues going on here. He asked him, then it came to a cave, lodged there, verse 9, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? The reason God asked him, why are you here, is not for God to get information. The reason he asked, why are you here, is for him to fully express what he's dealing with. So what are you dealing with, Elijah? And here's what Elijah says. Elijah says, I have been very zealous for the Lord, for the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Okay, so let's discuss why he's here. Why are you in this situation? Why are you so depressed? Okay, you ask me, God, I'm gonna tell you. I committed myself to you. I dedicated myself to you. All them other people are unspiritual. They didn't keep your covenants. They were worshiping those idols. And I'm all here by myself. He has adopted a victim's mentality. A victim's mentality is a mindset that you adopt because of negative circumstances that says, I'm where I am because everybody else is where they are. I'm here by myself because none of them are agreeing with you, and that's put me out here by myself, and you got me out here by myself. That's a victim's mentality. Now, you can be a victim, but you are to never adopt a victim's mentality where everybody else is responsible for where you are. A victim's mentality is because of them, I'm here. And as long as you have that kind of mentality, you'll always be there. Now, please don't misunderstand me. You may be a victim. It may be unfair. It may not be right. It may be evil. So you may be a victim, but that's different than adopting the mindset of a victim. Too many of us socially and economically, and in this case spiritually, have become victims of the devil. If it wasn't for the devil, I wouldn't be here. Well, guess what? He ain't changing. Okay? If it wasn't for them sinners, I wouldn't be stuck here. They not changing. If it wasn't for this situation, I wouldn't be here. Okay, that may be true, but they may never change. So what are you gonna do? So come, tell me why you're here. But don't expect me to just pat you on the back and feel sorry for you, because the thing that brought you here may never change. And many of us block the supernatural because we become comfortable as victims. Many of us have gotten stuck in our station in life. Some of us have relatives who will never get out of their situation because somebody else has put them there, somebody else is keeping them there, and the somebody else is never going away. This is a racial issue, it's a social issue, it's a class issue, and in this case, most importantly, it's a spiritual issue. Elijah was wrong. He says, I'm a victim and I'm all by myself. So let's follow this. He asks him a question, he gives him a victim's answer. He then gives them all these experiences, but he says, I wasn't in none of them. I was only in the blowing breeze. Don't only look for the supernatural in something extraordinary. The supernatural, that is the voice and presence of God, often shows up in the ordinary. In other words, he wasn't in the fire, he wasn't in the wind, he wasn't in the earthquake, he was in the breeze. He brought him to the mountain of God, into a quiet place of his presence. Because many of us don't hear God because there are too many other voices we're hearing. Too many loud things, the wind, the fire, the earthquake. And he says, no, I'm in the breeze. I'm in the nice, soft thing that you're getting with my presence. Now, why are you here? Because sometimes when you're discouraged, you need somebody with flesh and blood. Sometimes talking to God, he's a spirit out there, he's real, but he's a spirit out there. So guess what God did? God gave him a friend. I got somebody I have already set up to bring into your life to minister, to encourage, to lift you up, and to bring you out of your depression. God has an angel for you. He's got a person for you. He has himself for you. He gave Elijah all three of those to give him a supernatural experience to lift him out of his depression. And one of the reasons that the church exists is to have people available in your life when you are down who can embrace you, minister to you, lift you up, and he can use you to do the same thing for somebody else. Because when we are depressed, we need another perspective. That doesn't deny the reality of how we feel. What it does is it doesn't let you live there. Some of us are being destroyed by Satan. You need somebody who can whisper about the power of God in your life. Somebody is being intimidated by Jezebel, and you need to know from somebody who can see outside of you that greater is he that is in you than Jezebel who is threatening you. You need to be lifted out of your discouragement through honesty with God, through taking care of yourself physically in order to get the rest you need or the help you need, and to have somebody in your life who loves you enough and God enough to hook the two together. When that takes place, you may still get discouraged, but God will lift you out of it, because even godly people have to struggle with discouragement.
Some of you are standing in front of something that has hurt you and disappointed you, and you can't make sense of it. And the question tonight is, do not interpretations belong to God? Because in this moment of your life, the way you interpret what is standing in front of you, whether it's in the form of an opportunity or opposition, will determine the momentum that you have going forward into the rest of your life. And now Joseph is in a position of power, but what happens next in his life depends on what he does in this moment. The Bible says in Genesis 45 verse 1, then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried, make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Up until this point, they didn't know who he was because he looked so different than he did the last time they saw him. Sometimes what God will take you through in your life will make the people who used to know you unable to recognize you. But the test comes when you have to decide what you are going to do with the people who did not recognize what God had put in you. It is not the event that determines the direction of your life. It is not the event that determines the outcome of this season. It is not the event that determines the trajectory of your ministry. It is your interpretation. Do not interpretations belong to God? So I'm not downplaying what you did to me. You pushed me into that pit. It's a fact. It happened. I can't take it back. I can't change it. I didn't like it. It wasn't right. You broke my heart. You left me alone. You should have been there and you weren't there. You talked about me. You left me by myself. You said you would and you didn't. You sold me, but God sent me, and all at the same time. So I came to ask you a question tonight. Do not interpretations belong to God? Do you want to live in the reality of the event or the revelation? See, I used to always expect God to respond to my prayers with an intervention. And the more I read the story of Joseph, I realized that in many different situations, God chose not to intervene for Joseph. And God chose not to change the situation at all. Silence. Silence. This should have been a breakout session, really. I'm telling you. This is the kind of message that I never wanted to hear, because I thought that God would always change the situation if I had enough faith to change it. And then a few situations came into my life that no matter how much I prayed about them, or no matter how much I fought, the situation didn't change. But the more I prayed, the more I started to change. I need an interpretation of what I'm going through in my life right now. I need God to show me why my children are acting crazy. I need God to show me. If you don't learn to interpret situations, that's the greatest gift that the Spirit of God gives, is the ability to interpret a situation according to your faith, not your feelings. And I am learning this more and more, that my interpretation is so off sometimes because I interpret other people's reactions through my own insecurities. And so I keep trying to judge people's responses to me, but if I'm interpreting it through my own insecurities, I look like grasshoppers in my own eyes, not in theirs. That's an interpretation. The first time I preached internationally through an interpreter, I was so nervous that I called one of the men in our church who had preached internationally more than I had, and I said, "You got any tips for me?" He was like, "Yeah, pray for a good interpreter." And I said, "Well, what makes a good interpreter?" I mean, he said a few things, but I said, "How will I know if I've got a bad one?" He said, "Well, when you finish talking, if he talks a lot longer than you just talked, you've got a bad interpreter. If you say one sentence and he says three, then he's adding something to what you just said. You've got a bad interpreter." And I came all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina to tell you, you got a bad interpreter. Because you keep adding stuff, like you keep hearing things that aren't there, and seeing things that aren't there, and thinking things that aren't true. Some of you need to fire your interpreter, because you are interpreting your present through the lens of your past. And so you're dragging all of that pain and all of that resentment and all of that regret, and you are in the prison of your own perspective. And so what God has given you really is good, and it really is a reason to celebrate, and you really could be content. But your interpreter is telling you stuff based on what other people have. You know, it's a terrible way to interpret your life, through somebody else's Instagram post, because that is not their real life. That is not their real family. Their kids only acted like that for 3 seconds for them to take the picture, and then they started biting each other. It is not real. It is an illusion. And Paul said, pray for the power to interpret. Now, I don't just want the power to interpret tongues. I want the power to interpret my trials and my tests and my trauma. Because if I don't interpret it correctly, if God doesn't give me the power to interpret it, I'll fight all the wrong battles on all the wrong levels. And I'll send my brothers away because they hurt me when they were the very opportunity that God gave me.